Hello, everyone. I am extremely happy to be with you today. Thanks to Orch for giving me this slot to explain to you what we do in conservation agriculture in France. So very quickly, let me introduce myself. My name is Julien Senez. I am a farmer practicing conservation agriculture in France, north of Paris. I have a 200-hectare farm, a cereal farm. It is a former livestock farm. We stopped livestock farming 10 years ago when I took over the farm. We now run a cereal farm exclusively using pure no-till farming with the specific focus on producing a lot of biomass. On average, over the past 4 years, we have produced more than 4.5 tons of dry matter per hectare per year. Across all of our lands, I will explain to you what we have built, the model we have constructed, and what we are spreading today. So on our farm, here is how it is characterized. It is not extremely complicated. On one hand, you see we produce a lot of biomass, so covers, short covers, long covers, relay covers as well. To put it simply, as long as we don't have these 4.5 tons of dry matter, we don't sow. The main crop, we really aim to get the maximum amount of dry matter to seed our crops. We have the particularity of operating without base fertilization. And in parallel, with this amount of biomass that we produce, we manage to feed our crops and achieve very good yields. And alongside that, increase our fertility levels. So we really have a vision, both in terms of immediate results with yield development and in the very long term with fertility development. Here, I've also included some photos where we sow undercover. I will present all of this to you in detail. And you can see behind the sowing of fava beans, the quality of the planting, which is very beautiful. All our plantings are of very high quality and with a very good level of cleanliness. On the farm, we have two seeders. We have a tiny seeder and a disc seeder. We have a 6-meter Avatar, triple trimmers, and a 6-meter Sprinter equipped with fine points. These two seeders are shared because we farm across 3 farms to simply reduce our production costs. In parallel to that, I am not a calculator. I have also developed a whole advisory activity and in conservation agriculture, at least in terms of service provision. So we support farms, indeed. In fact, I have 2 trainers with me, and we train around 500 people per year. This year, I think we're on track to train between 700 DASU and 800 farmers with a 7-hour training program. In parallel to that, I have a whole distribution activity of direct seeding tines and direct seeding tools. So distribution of the Medcap and Dutch Opener brands across Europe. Then on the right side, I have a reconditioning center for seed drills for direct seeding, so exclusively tin seed drills. That means I import seed drills across Europe. We bring them to the farm or also to England, where we have a reconditioning center with a partner. And we recondition the machines to transform them into direct seeding drills exclusively for the Orch brand with SEOs and sprinters. The small push show is the 4th activity, the one we see at the bottom, which we are setting up. Direct seeding drills dedicated to vineyards. It's a very specific activity with many quality requirements, and we are developing our own direct seeding drill. We are releasing our first prototype in the coming weeks. To meet the demands and high expectations in this field, we will share it at the end of the session. Here we go then. Usually this is a part I do in the conclusion. Here, I will do it in the introduction. I am going to present our results to you to understand in any case where we are taking agricultural models today. Results after 10 years of conservation agriculture. First result, and not the least, I must admit my greatest pride is having increased the organic matter content. I took over the farm where we had 1.7% organic matter. Today we have increased it to 2.7%. So 1 point in 7 years in the end, since we had the first 3 years during which we had a transition, where we still did a bit of soil work, a lot of experimentation to find our footing. And now it's been 7 years where We are much more intensive in terms of biomass, and we have moved into faster direct seeding. The second lesson, or at least the second result, is that we have managed to rebalance our pH levels. That is to say, we have raised the acidic pH levels, and the basic pH levels have been adjusted towards neutrality. We achieved a gain of plus 0.5 minus 0.5 to aim towards 7. Third point, we have developed our yields. We compare ourselves to the average of the local cooperative over the different years. What we observed is that we increased our wheat yields by 8% and corn by 12%, and all other crops, including protein crops, are making progress. In the range of 8 to 10% for all crops, we are managing to uncap the yields. This is mainly explained by the development of biomass and sowing under cover, which bring us a lot of short-term fertility. Then in terms of profitability, we have quite a few lessons. The first lesson is that when we switch farms to conservation agriculture and adopt pure no-till techniques, in the first year alone, we achieve a reduction of 110 euros per hectare in costs, primarily due to reduced soil work and related machinery savings. When we look at our farm, to be very specific, today we are at 270 euros in net margin gains. A large part of this is due to cost reduction. The second segment is the yield gain that we previously shared. And the third point, which is new for us since a year ago, is that we are compensated for the carbon we store in our soils. Another interesting criterion is that we have reduced our traction hours on the farm. For a 200-hectare farm today, we are at less than 400 hours. In any case, we are close to 400 traction hours, no more. Whereas before, we were much closer to 900 to 1,000 traction hours with the service. So almost a 60% reduction in traction hours. And then the last point is that we have had a reduction in the use of phytosanitary products, particularly herbicides, where today we use one herbicide, and on 25% of the surfaces, we have some follow-up, but we are no longer applying 2 to 3 herbicides. We have achieved very high gains in the cleanliness of our lands, and also a significant reduction in fungicides with crops that are much healthier overall and express their potential much better in terms of overall health and productivity. Another lesson is the carbon footprint. What needs to be understood is that from the moment we work the soil, have little cover, and use mineral fertilizers, we contribute to climate change. And that's very frustrating because today, agriculture contributes to climate change. Most conventional farms today, even organic farms, release between 2.5 tons and 3 tons of CO2 per hectare. My greatest pride is having managed at least to achieve a positive carbon balance where we have from 2017, we achieved neutrality. And for the past 2 years, we have had a positive carbon balance, and we store between 1 to 2 tons of CO2 per hectare, which allows us to be compensated for this part at a rate of 42 euros per hectare per year. So among the main agronomic lessons I wanted to share with you that we experienced when we made our transition, first point, and I also noticed this when I supported the farms, is that you need to start from an ideally solid foundation. That is to say, if we have organic matter levels around 2%, regardless of soil texture, 2% is a rate to keep in mind. We have good structures, a relatively correct level of weediness, and balanced pH levels. We can make this transition without a transition period. So directly, we can enter into pure direct seeding from the first year. And we have done this on several farms. It is something that can be done extremely well, but it is necessary to precisely meet these criteria. If you do not meet these criteria, it is crucial to be extremely clear. We have a transition period to undertake, during which we will intensify the biomass. We will not completely abandon soil work, and we will proceed gradually over a period of 3 to 4 years, focusing heavily on an intraplot logic, where we will first release the plots that are performing well, and have the others follow suit. The other point is that a cereal farm today can be managed without base fertilization. From the moment we produce more than 4.5 tons of dry matter per hectare, we have a sufficient buffer of fertility to both nourish our crops and sustain our long-term fertility. In no-till farming, I wouldn't have told you this 3 years ago, but today it's really obvious to me. You have to go into pure no-till. This is a great form of agriculture, and pure no-till undercover. It requires a lot of finesse, but once you implement it, you will see your soils evolve at an extremely fast pace. Fourth point, this is also a very important principle, is that you must always respect the carbon-nitrogen ratios. Let me explain. In your plots, you will be in a fairly carbon-rich environment when you are on a cereal farm, so you must always counterbalance these very carbon-rich environments with legumes or by adding more nitrogen-rich materials, which will allow you to rebalance the environment. As soon as you are unbalanced, you will encounter dysfunctions. And what will these dysfunctions be? It will be slugs, it will be diseases, it will also be the pressure from voles, which is hard to explain. But in any case, as soon as we are unbalanced, we have these issues. If we are balanced, everything runs smoothly, the orthophosphate wheel works, we don't create disruptions, and our system functions. Another important point is to gradually rethink traffic, the weight of machines, lighten the machines, implement controlled traffic in the plots, and pave the structures, which is extremely important. Intervening when the weather conditions allow it, these are truly fundamental things. And the last point, not the least, when making this type of change, everything relies on people. So this means that when you make this change, you need to think about transforming the mindset, in any case, to adopt a perspective of change for everyone involved in the life of the operation. So this will include your families, your employees, and the service providers who intervene. Everyone needs to be aligned and understand where you are taking things. This is something that is truly fundamental, and in the end, the hardest part. Because often, when an operator starts the process, they are convinced themselves what is needed is for them to bring their entire environment entirely in the same direction. So the covers undeniably are our greatest expertise. It is the expertise that we have developed. We have developed a true knowledge today around plants, and I'm going to explain it to you. What you need to remember when building a cover is to construct it based on the time span between the date you will sow the cover and the date you will destroy the cover by sowing the crop into it. We have a defined time span. Often it's around 100 days when we are transitioning between a crop harvested in summer and a crop planted in autumn, or 200 days when we are dealing with a crop harvested in summer and a crop planted at the beginning of spring. We often follow these rhythms. Here, what I have shown you in this table is the number of days we have between the harvest dates and the sowing dates. They are expressed in this matrix, the number of days. To put it simply, what is in light green are sequences where we only have 100 days. 100 days during which we will plant a cover crop. And this cover crop, we will design it in such a way that all the plants in the cover reach flowering at 100 days. This is where the carbon-nitrogen ratio is optimal. This is where it is easy to destroy the cover crops, and we do not enter the carbon cycle of the cover's fruiting. The second part, here, in a slightly more advanced way, are the cover crops that we will establish at 200 days. It's the same, or we will bring them to flowering at 200 days. So here we have a bit fewer species available. We will make slightly simpler mixes, but we will design these cover crops, this batch, and then we have a much more pronounced green, the dark green there, where we have a long period of time. These are often periods of 8 to 9 months available, in which we have the possibility to do 2 cover crops, a long cover followed by a relay cover. When you do this, the gain in terms of fertility is considerable. The unlocking of yields is also considerable and very impactful. We easily unlock yields by about 15 to 20%. by managing to produce between 6 and 8 tons of dry matter per hectare. It's considerable. And you can see the crops behind literally galloping. We will delve into each of these 3 types of cover crops: short cover crops, long cover crops, relay cover crops. To put it briefly, a short cover crop looks like this. It's a cover crop where in 100 days, we will produce around 4 tons of dry matter, 4 to 5 tons in particular. Here we see this cover crop. It's a cover crop with 5 tons, where all the species are either at the flowering limit or have started flowering. And here we will directly sow into this large biomass. Here, I have provided you with a type composition. Often, we started by creating cover crops with 10 to 12 species, and over time, we identified the species that were best suited to our land, and we settled on a composition of a cover crop made up of 7 species. What is very important when creating cover crops is to weigh these biomasses. Why do we weigh biomasses? To precisely determine the level of restitution of these dry matter tonnages. So typically, in the cover crop we saw earlier, when we weighed it, we had 5.4 tons of dry matter, which is very high for a cover crop, making it a good ratio. And this cover crop returned 78 units in terms of nitrogen, 30 units in terms of phosphoric acid, and 205 units in potash. There are models, notably the Mercy model, which is downloadable from the internet, that allow us to evaluate this ourselves. It is very important to take these restitution levels into account in your calculations. Now, we are going to look at a cover crop at 200 days. A cover crop at 200 days looks like this. Here, we have far fewer species available to take them to 200 days, and we will focus on a few species. Here, typically, a mix that works well for us at 200 days. We have a good base in grasses, where we see with the rye, a large root level, large biomass as well, heavy mulching. We destroy them. We also have a large legume base with fava beans and vetch. And also, I deliberately add sunflower, even if it's not a long-term cover crop. I include it mainly for aesthetics. I won't hide it from you, because sunflowers, honestly, are very, very beautiful. And behold the plain is very important as well. Rapeseed. I wanted to explain to you what we do with rapeseed. Extremely interesting. We actually built this quite quickly. In 2 years, we managed to develop this technique. What is happening today in France? I think there are many regions in Europe that are in the same situation. We have a lot of pest damage with flea beetles, stem weevils, a lot of parasitism that heavily impacts our yield. Agronomically, we have completely rethought rapeseed cultivation. In modern agricultural practices today, we carefully and efficiently sow rapeseed directly into straw stubble to retain moisture and to ensure optimal growth conditions. We then apply the mixture below, a fairly complex mixture composed of 5 to 6 species. And these species will cover the rapeseed, completely disrupting parasitism, which will literally protect the rapeseed during all the very early attack phases. This method is designed to effectively and efficiently protect the crop from potential threats. What is very interesting is that we have established this cover crop, and here you see the cover on the left as of September 25th. It's a cover crop. It's not even rapeseed anymore, yet the rapeseed is still thriving. And here, what I have shown you in the photo on the right is the rapeseed as of March 10th. Without chemical destruction, we managed to remove all the species from the cover crop. This means that among the species we have selected, which are buckwheat, fenugreek, sunflower, and fava bean, even winter fava bean, if we let them reach flowering and maturity, they will automatically decline. What is very important is to sow your companion planted rapeseed early, to sow it on August 1st, not August 15th, on August 1st, to bring the cover crop to full maturity and ensure that all species decline as soon as they reach the flowering stage. Even without frost, we managed to have rapeseed remain as the only plant at the end, along with clover, to create a permanent cover. So there you have it. It is something that is extremely interesting agronomically. It is something that we are replicating today. For 3 consecutive years, we have managed to replicate exactly the same thing, where in the end, we are left with only rapeseed without chemical destruction. This has allowed us to reduce our herbicides. It also nourishes fertility by maintaining extremely balanced carbon-nitrogen ratios. And agronomically, we are doing very powerful things, and it also gives us flexibility. If our rapeseed, unfortunately, suffers from potentially severe stem weevil attacks, in order to turn it around and convert this rapeseed into a cover crop, and then follow up with a typical maize crop, we must act appropriately and efficiently. So now we are going to delve into semi-direct undercover. I confess to you, literally, for me, it's an addiction. Semi-undercover is something exhilarating. There is no other word. It's really great. I started sowing undercover 11 years ago. As soon as I did the first plant, I thought to myself, this is extraordinary. I want this form of agriculture. For me, success is the month of October, when I take immense pleasure in sowing undercover. When you see the photos where we sow this cover in large biomasses, it's hard to express, but we take immense pleasure in it. And afterwards, it's very beautiful to follow the crops that lose this biomass, the level of biological life that explodes. It's a very beautiful form of agriculture that I can encourage you to get into. So what you need to understand when you start this type of technique is that you will be sowing in 3-4 centimeters of soil. When we leave a lot of crop residues, we work the soil less, we will have fine soil over 3-4 centimeters, and we will sow at 2 centimeters, precisely, no, not 3-4 centimeters, but 2 centimeters, precisely, in this fine soil. What is also very important is not to sow in very carbon-rich biomasses, where the seeds will get pinched in the straw. There, you can have between 30 and 40% losses plus development. If you haven't rebalanced this environment by adding very nitrogen-rich material, you are at considerable risk. The whole trick is to manage to clear the residues, to sow in this type of fine soil, and with an advanced extreme quality of implantation. There are 2 techniques in direct seed, the tine seeder, the disc seeder. What we mostly observe with climate change is that tine seeders are becoming increasingly essential today. They are extremely effective. With climate change, we have residues that do not degrade or degrade very little. This is a real problem today. And the tine seeder allows us to counter these phenomena that we are experiencing. Today, bought on the farm, 90% of our sowing is done with the tine seeder and 10% with the disc seeder. Across all 3 farms, we are at 65-35, with 65% using the tine seeder and 35% using the disc seeder. What I'm going to explain to you is how you can completely rethink your system by adapting the covers, all of this, to prioritize the type of seeder in your operation. Here are the qualities of implantation. You see the tines push aside the residues, fine soil. It's great, it's magnificent. And then we use air, the turbine, to propel the seeds and press them into the bottom of the furrow. What is really interesting is that with Senez seeding units, there is no need for pressing behind, no need for packing, no need for a chain. Just the passage of the tine, extremely narrow, allows for more soil. It creates a slight wave behind, and the soil comes back into place without pressing components. What has been happening for the past 2 years with complicated autumn conditions in France, often a lot of rainfall? We have seen a real boom, at least a peak for teen seed drills. That is to say, on one hand, we have the fine points that are equipped on seed drills for the summer, for the first autumn sowings as well. And on the other hand, we have the wide points. So here, it's a wide point from Metcalfe on the wing point, but we also have the same option with Dutch opener or Bourgold, with wider points that allow us to secure sowing when we are in extreme conditions, where we create a bit of soil flow, and this allows us to get out of situations that can sometimes be complex. So you see the 2 types of planting, fine point on the right. So here it's a pea sowing, fine point spacing 25 centimeters. And on the left, a wheat sowing done with the wide point, where we reduce the spacing going from 25 to 18.5 with sowing bands of 6.5 centimeter. last point, and it's a very important point in direct seeding. You need to take care of fertilization. Why? Because when you are in conventional agriculture, you work the soil, thus you mineralize, so you have available nutrients. When you do this, to be very clear, you are depleting your stock of organic matter. You are reducing your stock of organic matter to release short-term fertility. In conservation agriculture, there will be very little mineralization, so it needs to be compensated. We have this phenomenon, and then we also have another phenomenon where we bring in a lot of carbonaceous materials. And these carbonaceous materials, such as straw and cover crops, will require, or rather will call for nitrogen to decompose. The bacteria, all of that, come to consume nitrogen. This needs to be counterbalanced by making additions, by supporting both the cover crops and the main crops with small doses of fertilization on the row. It's fundamental. Here, we have a great example to support this buckwheat sowing. On the right, we fertilize, we apply 30 units. On the left, we didn't have enough fertilizer. We didn't fertilize over 2 hectares. Oh, the difference is considerable. On one side, we achieved 700 kilos of buckwheat. On the other side, 1.2 tons. So we have a 50% yield loss just because we didn't fertilize at the right dose. There you go. I'm done with this part. I will just explain to you in a few words the project, what we are doing with the vineyards. In the French vineyards, it's the same. We have a real revolution that is being organized, an agronomic revolution, of course. What's happening? We have a planned cessation of herbicides that is taking place. That's it, it's being put in place. We are developing large covers in the vineyards, and the movement is extremely rapid, driven by this movement, mainly linked to the consumer. What's happening there? Typically, it's in the Champagne region where we are implementing cover crops. It's already been 2-3 years that they have been developing these things. So right after the harvest, we come to sow covers, typically long covers, to bridge the gap until spring. And these covers, we come to lay them down. So here it's a cover that was at its peak in the interrow. Under the vine row, it was covered to limit weed growth. Here we are on the cover that is gradually exploding in April, and we see the vine rows that are in between, but are really extremely slowed down, protected by this cover. There we see this cover with the vine inside. And here we are in May. So we have the first fungal interventions to carry out. And we see this cover reaching maturity. And what happens afterwards? They come to roll this cover with rollers that have been dedicated to small caterpillar tractors like these. And we create real mats to, one, protect the soil. Because when we are in areas with high climate intensity, we have the soil covered like this. So we retain moisture much better and also control weed growth. So these are things that are becoming more widespread, which for now are being done on a small portion of the land. But everyone is starting to follow this path in the soil. Today, where I want to take things is much further, at least replicating what we do in agriculture in large-scale farming and applying it to vineyards, where there we have, on the diagram in blue, we have what we are currently doing in vineyards, which is starting to be implemented. And my firm intention is to take things much further. It's about achieving a second cover, a spring relay cover, to bridge the gap until spring, to manage weed growth throughout the cycle. The whole challenge in vineyards is that alongside this, during the spring phase, we have a very high intensity of machinery use and interventions. So the entire complexity we will have to manage is to rethink the entire system. Exactly like what we did in large-scale farming, where we will have to rethink our interventions using aerial methods, certainly drones for treatment, moving towards gradually, nonetheless, we will have to remove the straddle tractors from the plots and proceed in a new way. We will reintroduce both aerial methods and people for certain operations at the core of the system. Then for certain operations, we won't have any other choice. We will still reintroduce machinery, but with a lot of precautions. So after a cover like this, what we envision is achieving a double cover like this, composed of legumes, or at least plants, with minimal impact on the environment around the vineyard to avoid affecting grape production as well. So we are dealing with extremely advanced arboriculture, often with high values as well, where everything needs to be built. So this is extremely fascinating. In parallel to this, we are leading an entire project to design machines to achieve direct seeding in vineyards. Currently, this does not exist in an advanced form. Here, we want to use the best components and develop the best components. To do this in life, it's a particularly exciting project where everything needs to be done, everything needs to be built with a lot of complexity. And often when it's complex, it's extremely interesting. So we are going to put all our energy into achieving this. Listen, people have finished with my presentation. I am, in any case, extremely happy to have shared this moment with you. I can only encourage you to enter into this form of agriculture, which is extremely interesting, intellectually enriching, and rewarding. We learn every day, and we manage to restore fertility and meet consumer expectations. There you go. Thank you all.